So, welcome to Bring Your GRC to New Heights, the three metrics that every security team should track. My name is Aaron Lumna, and I'm on the Trust Cloud team, and I'll be your host for this session. So, today we're going to dive into how you can prove the value of your team's efforts and elevate the posture of your GRC and security initiatives with your leaders and your board. It can sometimes feel like climbing a mountain, but we're here to help you reach the summit. We'll start off our ascent by looking at why it's so difficult to report on security efforts in the first place and ask our experts how they think about measuring these programs at their own companies. We'll then outline a simple framework for what to measure and how to communicate it to stakeholders. Finally, we'll end our session with some time for a Q&A with the panel. Please feel free to submit questions through the Q&A feature at the bottom of the Zoom interface at any time, and we'll do our best to answer those. So, without further ado, I'd like to introduce you to our speakers. We're thrilled to have a panel who really knows their stuff when it comes to reporting on security and GRC. So I'll let them introduce themselves. Richa, let's start with you.
Sure, thank you, Aaron. Hi, everyone. My name is Richa. I've been part of the Trust Cloud community now for 2 years. Started working with Ernst & Young and A-Line, doing a lot of external audits when it came to PCI and ISO and SOC 2. And then I've also worked with a couple of companies, especially in the communication and law firm space, to help implement their GRC program and help them report their risks to their senior leaderships. So I've been on both the sides of the fence, and I'm really looking forward to having this conversation with the rest of our team here to further get more feedback on how they have done. So with that, I'm going to pass it on to you, Heather.
Thank you, Richa. My name is Heather Ryder. I'm the director of GRC at Desktop Metal, which is a 3D metal printing company located on the East Coast. I've been with the company for, I think I'm about to hit my 7-year mark now. And the company started out private, and has since gone public. And then we've also done a lot of acquisitions. And that's kind of where my expertise is in tech industry, starting as startups, going to scale up, and then moving up to enterprise. And so that's where kind of my feedback on the compliance piece will come from. And I'm really excited for us to talk about that.
All right. So, hey, everybody. Thanks for joining. My name is Rohit Pachuri. I'm the CISO for a company called Yext. For those who don't know what Yext does, we're in the digital experience space. We basically provide capabilities such as product listings and search features, along with other features to kind of showcase your brand and business. For me, I've been with the company for about 2.5 years now, and I'm responsible for pretty much everything cybersecurity, product, infrastructure, corporate security, along with vendor risk, and also elements of data privacy, trust, and security operations. Outside of my day job, I also sit on the board as an advisor for a few cybersecurity and technology firms, startups more so. So I'll try to do justice with trying to provide perspectives on both sides of the aisle. All right, that's me.
Sweet, awesome, thank you. And I think before we dive deep into this, I'm really very curious from both of your perspective to understand what does your board care about? How are you having those communication with your board when it comes to the metrics you want to report them to? So Rohit, if you don't mind, if you want to go ahead and start about how are you creating that awareness with your board on the GRC value?
Yeah, for sure. And also, not just my board, but what does any board care about? I think maybe we should peel back a little bit and really try to understand what are the board's fiduciary responsibilities. Two things, right? One comes creating and upholding the shareholder value, which is essentially that the board is a representative of the shareholders themselves, and so they have to represent them in the right light. That means better dividends, better revenue, better share price, things of that nature, everything that connects back into revenue, and making sure you're kind of going in the stream, from that shareholder perspective. The second one really comes to light is the providing oversight and monitoring. And oversight is essentially corporate governance, and monitoring is just making sure the company strategy and the executives are going in the right direction, staying on track, yada yada. So the motivations really come from that for the board. So the value system is created based on these responsibilities that they have. And so when you look at the value components, that's what they really care about. So essentially, if that you have certain goals as a business, make happier customers possibly, or work with your partner ecosystem in an effective manner. That means working with your businesses that that you either service or you're being serviced for. And using that is how you would, kind of look at what exactly are the things that they care about. And now you bring it down to cybersecurity specifically or GRC specific. And it depends from company to company. Of course, every company is different in how they operate, but I would start there. Yeah. And that's where you would kind of align cybersecurity into the business, not the other way around.
Yeah. Good, valid points. Heather, you mentioned about all the acquisitions that your company is going through. How are you guys adjusting to that altitude on what is important and how do you report that up?
Yeah, I think, Rohit gave a really great background on the generics of what a board is interested in, but I also think, there's a piece of what the board is interested will change as the company changes, right? And so in the early days of Desktop Metal, given the industry we're in, we had a very big focus on security and IP and just protecting data and protecting, shareholder investment. And I think since we did 12 acquisitions in 12 months, there was such a much bigger, ecosystem. Is the conversation started to change to, okay, what does our overall landscape look like? What are the overall risks look like? And how do we reduce those down into kind of a smaller footprint? So I think, there's a really important piece of what your board is asking for right now may not be what they're asking for in a year, and making sure you keep a pulse on that and on the industry changes.
Yeah, and I think that's a very valid point, because there is no, these are the 5 things you report irrespective of the industry or company size or all of those things. Sounds like each one of us are very nuanced. And for everybody who's listening, that's where we are going forward with this webinar. We want to give you those skills to identify what is important for you to report on and go through that thought process, because it differs for each and every industry. And maybe you guys can talk to it a little bit too, Rohit. You mentioned about being in the private versus public industry, it has changed for you and morphed for you as well.
Yeah, for sure. And those are good points, right? I think, just like how the landscape is changing, the motivations change, and also what they care about, the board cares about. And I think also within different industry spaces or different market segments, they have different motivations on what they want to bring to the table. In my experience, I think there are 3 categories I would put in, just from a broader sense. One is a heavily regulated space. Think of finance, think of healthcare.
Right.
In order for you to survive as a business, you need to ensure that the certifications that you have in play, HIPAA, HITRUST, PCI, whatever that is, you just have to make sure those are table stakes. Those are something you need to be compliant with before you can even start selling your your platform or product, whatever that is. So that becomes the true motivation for the board. Are we compliant? Are we monitoring the compliance? Every year we go into this. And then for the startups is a second category, I would say, startups, maybe not so much in the regulatory space, but still trying to make a mark for themselves and trying to build the business and sustain themselves over a period of time. For them, I think the discussions are building a bigger pipe, selling to bigger customers, if you're in that arena, of course. And now it's more about your customers' requirement becoming your motivations. Like if your customers come and asking for very specific things that you don't have in the program right now, or you haven't built, that becomes one of the things you have to think about. And I think not that every customer can push you around. It's more about creating a pattern about, hey, there's 80% value we would get by making this 20% change. How do you define that? I think that's an art more than a skill, and you got to figure that out.
Yeah.
And lastly, I would say for the public companies and maybe more established public companies, it's also about assessing the motives of the business itself. Like, where exactly are you heading? Are you heading into a new market segment? Are you trying to maintain a competitive edge? Right? Are you entering into something very sensitive, maybe from a demographic standpoint? Are you looking at socioeconomic factors? Like, how does that affect the company? Like, this would mean hacktivism, this could mean bad actors, nation state, whatever that is. I think, it depends on where exactly you fall in, and really kind of, assessing that threat surface that you're in helps you kind of, build the meaningful metrics.
Yeah, the one thing I think about risk management is you don't know what you don't know. So it's a always continuous evolution of assessing through all of those different vectors you said. And also like all of these new regulations, like the SEC now requiring so many more disclosures on your risk practices, or your cyber insurance putting a lot more pressure on you to manage your risks and showing them the proof of mitigation. I think that's the external ways that this program, the stressors that make your program a little bit more fleshed out. With that, we can go on to the next slide. And that's where, again, as I said, like we want this to be a very consistent and meaningful reporting structure that you can create for your organization, looking at how Rohit and Heather are coming with building that out for their own organization as well. And I would also like to say that there's a Q&A feature within the Zoom. So if anybody listening, you have some specific questions for Rohit and Heather, please feel free to use it, and we'll make sure that we bring that up. With that, we can go on to the next slides. And this is exactly how we want you to think about putting your reportable metrics in place. Like we want to start with the basic questions, which if you guys have kids, you know, these are the questions that you get inundated with every day. So we start with our risk management and our metrics in the same way. Why should you do this? Is like, why should the business care about it? Bringing it back to the why always consistently helps. And then what do you need to have to be able to show that metric? And then how would you go about operationalizing that metric? I think those are the three key pieces that we want to kind of walk through this. And with that, we'll go to the next slide. And Aaron, can we launch that poll? This is where we just want to understand how you guys, or how many of you guys are working responsible for reporting risk to your about your division. So we'll take probably like 30 seconds to answer these questions, and then we'll dive deeper. Now, if we can just share the results, Aaron.
Yep. Let me see. We have a few more rolling in. All right, we're going to end it right now.
Perfect. So that's good. A lot of you are responsible for reporting risks to on your division, to your leadership. And sounds like quarterly is the metric of the frequency of choice, but I'm sure anybody who's doing this, you can relate that it's always an ongoing process. You might be reporting it quarterly, but you're probably keeping eyes on it on a daily basis. So thank you for participating in this. And again, like please keep sending your questions. So let's start with you, Heather. Like when it comes to all this fluid dynamics that Desktop Metal is going through, how do you curate that why experience? Like why certain risks demanded more of your attention, and how do you communicate that to the board saying, yes, this is something that you really want to keep your eyes on?
It's a great question. And I think we start with understanding the business goals, right? We have 12 acquisitions. So we had 12 business goals that are moving into one, and understanding the historics of what their goals were before and where they currently are at versus what is the new plan for how they're going to merge into kind of this one strategy, and then identifying our business partners in those spaces and understanding how we can build a partnership really in supporting them in those goals. Where are the risks and what they're looking to do, and how would that financially or otherwise impact the overall goals of the company. A big part of what we do is on the financials, right? So in terms of a lot of the work I do is in sales pipeline, whereas we have all of these different companies now that have different pipelines, and how are we supporting them in merging together, right? So we have one acquisition that normally does, maybe work in a manufacturing space, and they're looking to spread that over. And then what is the compliance requirements for that to then move their work into what one of the other acquisitions does. So that's a lot of my focus is in the kind of the sales pipeline. And so I think it all ties back to the value. What are the goals of your overall company? And then what are the goals of the individual functions, and how does risk play into those individual functions? And then where do you come in to be able to support them, and or even to take their goals to the next level, right? It could be that they want to start selling to, you know, in the HIPAA space, right? And helping them understand what it would cost to do that, but also understanding like the sales pipeline and being able to say, hey, you know, if this is their pipeline and this is how much it's going to cost, here's the ROI on doing that work, and here's how we would need to get there. And putting it into financials is really big specifically for our board.
Yeah, that helps. And I think tying everything back to your revenue stream and making sure that people process technology supporting that revenue stream, that's a great one place to like start assessing your risk. So make sure that we are covered from that standpoint. Rohit, I know when we were talking about this webinar, you had some other avenues too, like revenue stream is one way, but you had some other avenues that you would encourage people to think about too.
Yeah, for sure. And, you know, I think, you know, why should we even talk about these things? Why do we even need GRC function? Why do we need cybersecurity at the business? Right. I think, you know, that really is the point I want to make. Like, why are we doing these things is essentially to keep the business disruption at bay. Right. So it doesn't matter if you're coming from an audit standpoint or from a potential business loss standpoint, which could be caused by a bad actor. That's the business. We're protecting the business to ensure that the business reaches its whatever that success they're looking for. So we're really that guardrail in a way on how we enable the business to move forward. And when it comes to, you know, making sure we align with the business, revenue definitely is one of the biggest things, because that's really, you know, like we spoke about, the shareholder value, you know, really comes from that. But there are elements that sit outside of that too. And this is where the value components matter. What are the value components that the company is made of? And if you're trying to not just generate revenue, but also, you know, maybe hire good talent, retain good talent, maybe that's going to be a different, you know, metric that you also have to focus on, because now you're thinking about the productivity of the company, right? Not just launching tools, not just launching questionnaires, but also making sure how seamless and transparent they are for the end users. And also, what kind of benefit are you getting out of that? Is it just because you're complying with the status quo, or does it actually make sense for the business that you're in, you know, to launching these different things? This could mean tech, this could be non-tech, but ideally we don't want to create more work for people unless there's an actual benefit that comes out of that. And I really like what Heather talked about. It's not just about, you know, what you're trying to bring to the table, but also what others are bringing to the table. This means there are different functions, and company operates, you know, as a combination of different things. Like, you have different functions, every function has to provide the value. And what cybersecurity does, or what GRC does, it's making sure that value is upheld and making sure we have like the proper protections around it. So every function has to, you know, has to have some level of alignment, you know, back into security. So we know like what exactly is at stake and what's that risk to the stake, which typically is measured by risk appetite and risk thresholds, or risk tolerance maybe. But really understanding that, you know, would be really helpful on how you know, kind of drill down into the controls you have to establish on the business, and also showcase that. You know, most often than not, where people, you know, say this, and I've seen this too, is like, you know, we do a lot of things on the back end, but it's not visible. I think it's also our job to make it visible. We got to do a roadshow, right? We got to toot our own horn every now and then. And so, you know, people know, like, you know, these are the things that matter, and this is how we're making sure the business is being enabled.
Yeah.
You know, one thing I'll talk about though is also maybe a broader way of thinking about the whys. And I think, Richa, you spoke about this, why we're, you know, seeing these SEC rules coming to the forefront. It's because a lot of, you know, socioeconomic factors, or macroeconomic factors for that matter, are usually good indicators of a threat climate that we're operating in. And no wonder why we're seeing the exponential rise in directives and standards and rules that are coming out, because now they want to really lay down like what is cybersecurity, privacy, GRC actually had to bring to the table, and how is that exactly protecting the business, right? And also the broader communities. So it just makes sense for us to build the right controls with a good structure in mind. So we don't have to go in all different directions. Every time a new standard comes, we don't have to go in direction, as long as you have the right foundation built. Yeah. Everything is about adapting and making sure your modules of, you know, cybersecurity / GRC are actually working within that framework.
Yeah, makes complete sense. And when you guys were talking about, I think having a good, well-articulated why, joining it back to your business values, your revenue, also helps the GRC team or the security team get get away from that stereotyping of this is a no, right? Because the whole company thinks like if you go to security, it will be a no. But now, yes, to your point, let's be more visible. The no is because, is it satisfying your business value? Is it satisfying your revenue stream? If it's not, do we have the appetite to take on this risk? So if you can articulate this and you can share this with the wider company, it helps federate that risk responsibility throughout every organization, because it cannot be siloed just to the GRC and the security teams anymore. It has to be a company-wide initiative. So I really like that you have to provide that value and toot our own horn and also educate everybody else why we are not doing certain things or why we are doing certain things. With that, let's talk about the what. Let's say we have defined the whys. This is the business value, this is the revenue. What kind of metrics and how are you assigning those goals? Like, how do you know to track these whys that you had established in the first place? Rohit, you want to go?
Sure, yeah. I was just taking a quick pause there. Okay, I can go.
Yeah.
So I think it kind of builds upon the same narrative that we've been having in this discussion thus far, right? We start with the why. We know like why exactly are we doing these things, and now let's make sure we translate that into proper what's. And this goes back to I have one principle in how I operate. It's just first understand the business, then build the trust, and then bring cyber into that mix. This is a good trifecta to keep in mind, because once you've established that, the framework of knowing like this is what business wants and this is how you build the trust before you execute on things, there's more lubrication on how you can actually execute things, and there's more success and effectiveness that you could actually get as an outcome when you're doing things in a certain sequence of manner. And for me, that's really the what, is how you make sure these things are actually aligned in a sense that you're making or bringing the right value to the table. For me, I think when it comes to what am I talking about with the board, with the senior management, when it comes to that point, is three things essentially. And this also goes back to my way of assessing the business before I come up with this. So one is cost avoidance. Any operational hit for the company, cost of capital, right? This could be from a bad actor or otherwise, or maybe a regulator. I wouldn't say them as a bad actor, but one of the actors, right? So that means it's an operational hit for the company, right? You still have to go pay fines and penalties. And so I want to make sure that's being captured. And also people know it's not that we don't want to do that, if we're not compliant with something, yes, of course, you're liable for things that you haven't established, and now you have to pay for it. But it's also making sure the right people are in the room and you're talking about those risks. That's one. The second one is audit conformance, right? We spoke about this, a few times in the session. It's like, there's certain table stakes and you just have to meet them. And if there's, some kind of diversion that's happening, people need to know. And lastly, for me, just we're in this space where it's very crowded. Digital experience platform is very crowded, and where we operate. So for me, it's also maintaining that competitive edge in the market. So what kind of features do we build? How do we talk about the things that we build in the platform and also around the platform on the periphery? And that also becomes a metric that I bring to the table. But I'll keep it at that high level, and then I think there's more elements that come out of each of those high level metrics, which is going to be more company specific, but those are the high level.
Yeah, sure. Thank you for sharing that. Heather, anything you would like to add to that?
Yeah, I'm actually doubling down on a point that you brought up on the last time, where we talk about like the why and building the partnerships. I think probably a lot of the people on this call experience the fact that when you're looking at security or GRC function, you're often seen as a cost, like a necessary cost, but just a cost to the business. And also, maybe archaic, and anything we do will slow down the business. And I think there's a big shift that is happening and continues to continue to happen, especially as cybercrime becomes so much bigger and so much scarier for companies, that we are a business partner, right? It doesn't just have to be, we cost the business money to put in security and we slow down people's work processes by making them use multi-factor or change their passwords or things like that. There's so much more to it than that in terms of proving that we're business partners and that we can make sure, or we can help in many cases them complete their goals and drive the value that they're doing to the business. And I think, you know, I would agree with kind of Rohit's overall 3 that he talked about. And I think competitive advantage is one that isn't talked about a lot, or it is still in its kind of infancy of security is becoming such the forefront. And if you're doing work that requires compliance, right? If you need certain compliance requirements in order to even be in certain pipelines, obviously you're able to tie that in. But I think there's a piece of, you know, as consumers care more about security, and as cybercrime and ransomware and things like that become bigger, being able to say, we're securing your data and here's how we're doing it is going to have more weight. So I feel like competitive advantage is going to be one of those ones that are, we're going to see more and more of that come up, especially depending on industry. And then also I would say that there is cost reduction, right? We want to showcase what would happen if we're not compliant with these frameworks for government regulations. But there's also, again, the potential to tie into revenue. And where are we potentially saving the company money, or where are we potentially improving the capability or increasing the pipelines?
Yeah.
So I would add that.
Yeah, no, fantastic points. And I think this is also the step where you kind of define your appetite. Like, what is my threshold? If something is below this, I don't care about it. If something is above this, and that's also the what factor that goes into defining those metrics. So since both of you have experience in both private and public, like how has that evolved over time? And have you seen your insurance or industry trends kind of push you on changing those thresholds for your organization?
You bought insurance. We're kind of entering into the hot water now. So yes, definitely. I think there's a change in how we think about coverage, limits, sublimits for a public company versus a private company. But I think ultimately it hinges on the fact that what kind of business losses are you concerned about? Business loss, you know, it could be termed as like data loss is a business loss, right? Business disruption, direct business disruption, or contingent business disruption. Extortion, ransomware is spoken a lot, so that is also a business loss. So I think what concerns you as a business, I think you need to really have a good understanding about what are you exposed to as a business, which is where some form of risk or threat modeling would help out. So, you know, like this is the paradigm that I've set, and this is where I'm, you know, standing, and this is the exposure I have. And now you can kind of, you know, trace it back and see what kind of controls that you have in place, and then the complementing effect of that is insurance. I feel insurance actually plays a pretty critical factor when we're trying to define what you spoke about, Richa, is a risk, not so much a risk appetite. I feel that's just the stake, but more of a risk tolerance aspect, which is kind of, you know, a sister metric to the risk appetite, but more important for cyber is because let's say you have 10 million coverage for extortion. Like as soon as that hits it, like do we have right level of controls that could prevent us from not paying out of pocket after the insurance has taken care of it? You know, it hopefully doesn't come to that, but if it does, like what is the you know, game plan we do after that? I think that's where we have to figure out, like, insurance is not a replacement to a security program. It's just a complementary to the security program, right? Just like GRC is. GRC is that foundation, right? And then you have a skyscraper that you have to build on top of that, which is essentially cybersecurity. It gives you a good structure, but it's not the end of it. It's where you begin. And I would kind of put cyber insurance also as maybe another weapon in your toolkit that you could use, you know, when the time is right.
Yeah, and I think the cyber insurance helps with that board communication a little bit too, because now you can articulate that a lot more in the financial terms from an external threat vector coming into you. And I love that point about security and compliance. I just don't like when people use it synonymously. Like, no, these are two very different beasts. Compliance is a subset of security, but it's not the entirety of security. Heather, your like how have you defined the thresholds with your moving company environments?
My experience is that private companies are more focused on security to the point that they need to be able to continue to protect their data and function while they try to get that sales pipeline going, right? And then as you start to go into, and to some extent risk, right? Risk around their data, risk around IP or whatever it is that they're trying to protect with the security piece. And then as you transition into that public company, it becomes more of a focus on the compliance side of things, on the governance side of things, and the risk piece of it greatly expands, right? Because the business is looking at more things. I mean, only it's a small piece of risk, right? But business continuity and disaster recovery, you know, is a risk overall. And I think we've seen an interesting increase of focus in that, especially in my industry, is given that I'm in manufacturing. After the COVID pandemic and all the supply chains are to some extent still are impacted, right? So I think you know, as you expand, and then also depending on what's happening in the world today, and we have a lot of events happening in the world today that can impact a lot of different industries, you see that growth in the GRC and the security space, where folks are like, you know, it's when something happens, right? Something happens that maybe is unexpected. Maybe it impacts your pipeline. Maybe, you know, you do need to kick into place a BCP or a DR plan, but your business hasn't had it to that point. All of a sudden you're like, oh, we need that now. And I think one of the biggest challenges is trying to prep a private company to get ahead of that before they go public. And be able to start putting plans in place to help prepare so that you don't have to have something happen before you're ready for it.
Completely makes sense. Thank you for sharing that. And then I think the next step that we talk about is the how. So let's say you have identified the why you want to take care of it, what metrics you want to track. Now I think Rohit, you said you put some more lubrication around it to understand how you're going to get those metrics. Based on your experiences, how you drive that, and not just from GRC, from security, and holistically from a company too. Like there's so many more avenues than GRC and security. You have legal, you have financial, you have market risks, your sales risks, as well as you change your GTM strategy. So would love to understand how you guys are tracking those.
Yeah, and you know, just to start off with things here, I think GRC is a great, like I said, it's a great foundation to use that because GRC is well understood by the boards and the management in general than when you bring in cybersecurity. Cybersecurity is this little thing in the corner. We don't really understand. If there's a need for us to talk about it, we'll talk about it, but not right now. GRC, it's good that we have, you know, some kind of a leverage that we could use to bring cybersecurity into that equation. It's just how do we, you know, weave that thread between GRC and cybersecurity. I think GRC, like for me, like GRC, let's break it down, right? The governance, what is that? Essentially, it's operational resiliency. Like, how do we make sure that there's strategic efforts put in place so we have that element of governance that's taken care of company-wide, effectively company-wide. Maybe it doesn't start there, but ideally we have to get that, you know, go into that direction. And then risk, it's more about risk management for effective, you know, visibility into the business exposure. Like we spoke about, you know, once you have some kind of an outcomes from a risk modeling standpoint, you would know what you're exposed to. And now you have to bring that down to the risk, which is comes into play. And then lastly, compliance, of course, like everybody knows, certifications and audits. There's something we just have to keep up with, right? I think if you're able to kind of, you know, make the necessary folks aware of these components, now you have cybersecurity fits into each one of them. It's just that how do you enhance G and R and C into cybersecurity elements? And now you're not really looking for cyber savvy people to understand that, but you're just you're creating like a common language for people to know this is how we would start and this is how we would expand, you know, into that element. A few things that I use is risk burn down rate. Essentially, we're talking about you know, we've identified certain risks and how do we burn that down, and that goes as one metric, so we can actually start investing on that. And then there's a risk arrival rate, like how fast are we, you know, taking on risk. This could mean we're maybe going into, I'm just going to pick like federal, like, or we're going into federal government. Now you need to have FedRAMP. Like how much of that risk is for the company, like risk more from opportunity risk and also a systemic risk. An opportunity, if you're doing it right now, what are we losing by not doing it, right? And the systemic is when you go into these very sensitive environments, it's a heterogeneous environment. So there's a lot of different things you have to look at. And do you have the necessary quorum to actually establish that? And once you have that, then the last one I would focus on is basically the risk escape rate. Like, we're burning it down. We know what the arrival rate is, but what's escaping into production? Production meaning not just, what you're selling to your customers, but also maybe your internal systems. That also means a threat for your GRC, right? If you have like a SOX audit and something got escaped into your live production system, that could be a violation in the next cycle. So, kind of treading that lightly and also making people aware that these are the risks that we're focused on, I think is maybe, one of the ways on how I can do it. It's not the only way, but, one of the flavors that you can think about.
No, those are good points. And I think that's where also you understand those mitigation types. Like maybe based on that analysis that you just did, like, I don't want to get into FedRAMP space because it's opening us into a lot more things. Yes, this is an opportunity loss, but this is more important. And as a business, we decided with our what, why, and how. Heather, just wanting to understand your thoughts on the same.
Yeah, absolutely agree with what Rohit said. And I think there's an additional piece there on, oh, Rohit, what was the last thing you were talking about? I'm so sorry.
Systemic, are we talking about systemic risk or the risk escape?
Risk escape. I think, and then, doubling down on what Richa said, is it all comes back to what is the actual business value, and a lot of that is cost, right? Is being able to turn those into numbers for the board or numbers for people in your business processes to say, this is how many man hours it's going to take to implement this. This is how much money it's going to cost in a year to year. This is, the change of process that's going to occur for you to do those things. And I think when we look at, being able to communicate GRC, I think we break it down similar to what Rohit said, where we look at it from first the frameworks perspective, right? What frameworks do we need to be compliant with, or what frameworks are we wanting to be compliant with based off of where the business is going, and how are we tracking against those? And what does that mean from, those numbers are great, like, oh, we're 40% complete, but what does that actually mean for the board? And taking it one step further to say, this is the potential timeline where we would be able to bring in new opportunities or have a competitive advantage, or, this is where we might lose opportunities if we slip on this deadline. I think always tying it back to financials, if you can, is a great way to be able to communicate to the board. And again, it ties back to what board you have. Some companies are going to have ones that are more focused on security. I have worked with a couple of people who have worked at security companies, right? And so of course they're going to care about those things. I've worked at a software company where, becoming SOC 2 compliant and maintaining that was big because we needed to be able to communicate those to customers. I don't know how many folks here on the call deal with a lot of customer questionnaires coming in asking about where's your security and whether or not that either impacts them, buying your product, or how much they invest in the product, depending on the tiers and the data that they're implementing. So I think I start kind of with the frameworks as a one metric, right? And then tying it back into value. And then I also try to tie it into OKRs and goals. If sales is where I have an expertise in, so I'll keep going back to that. But, if this sales team has a goal of increasing their pipeline within, the HIPAA or in the dental space, we do work in the dental space, by X%, how many customers are not going with them or not buying from us because we don't have certain compliance levels, right? It's that type of tie-in, if we can get it back to numbers and finances, that I think is really a language that the board understands, I'm sure, or any board will understand, right? Yeah. I think some boards are more tech savvy, but.
Yeah, no, you brought up a good point. Like, I think the how is also very much dependent on who your stakeholders are and what language they understand. Like going into the question, the situation you arise, like if you're going into FedRAMP space, I bet your contract language is going to change a whole lot. You get held to a bigger scrutiny. Your legal will need to understand those risks that come along with it, with going through and rehauling all the contracts and adding that updated language. So you got to talk to them in that language and what that means, like what it means for your sales, because now they cannot go and pitch the same way that they were pitching for the other customers. You have to have certain kind of ways to articulate what you're doing. So there's an impact across the board when you're changing things. And again, going back to this why, what, how helps like communicate that out to the entire organization so everybody's on the same page. Fantastic review. Aaron, can we go to the next one? So this is where this is automating your insights, but I also want to understand between you both, Rohit and Heather, you guys have been doing this, sounds like a long time in both private and public space. A lot of the poll attendees today said that they report on a quarterly basis, but I know from first-hand experience that risk is a forever ongoing process, even though you might be doing this manually once a quarter. How are you guys currently keeping track of these things? You have toolings in place, or is that an Excel-based exercise, or ad hoc before the leadership meeting?
I can start.
Yeah.
Definitely not Excel. I think we've definitely migrated off of Excel, but still there's a component of ad hoc practice when it comes to pulling the insights. And when you talk about insights, maybe break that down, is essentially like we're talking about the tool insights, process insights, automation insights, whatever that makes sense ultimately for us to build a better and surviving program, right? We do have some tooling in place, yes. We are, also, we've been kind of architected most of our systems in a Frankenstein approach. So we have a lot of systems, homegrown systems. So we kind of, tie each other, pull the pipes here, put the pipes there. And so I think now the intent is to consolidate at least some part of that. So we're, staying true to, what is the value that we're trying to bring from an insight standpoint. This could mean data access. This could mean, some of the risks that we're focused on the product security standpoint, whatever that is. I think we need a single governance layer to begin with, which is where the process develops essentially. And then you bring that down to the tool. Of course, tool is not going to fix the problem. You got to have the program that ties around it. But I think tool helps you enhance and, build certain workflows. So it's a little more easier. Like let machines do the things that they're best at doing and let humans do what they're best at doing, right? So I think that automation piece from, pulling insights and posting insights and showcasing dashboards, I think that is super helpful. And we do some of that right now. I wouldn't say we're perfect at that.
Yeah, that's where I say like risk management is evolutionary. I don't think you can ever come to a perfect state of risk management. It's always ongoing. Heather, how are you guys managing it with your 12 different acquisitions and everybody having their own siloed?
Yeah, it's definitely been a challenge. I mean, we started off with kind of the Excel spreadsheets, if you will, as we met with each company and talked through a list of questions that we had kind of come up with, and then we tried to find similarities across the board, right? But when we look at risk, or just our overall compliance framework, it could be like, okay, well, this company is compliant here, but this company is only half compliant. And then how do you look at that in a holistic manner? So we've been working on merging those together, and we have a big push to stop creating PowerPoints that are snapshots in time, right? We want those automated dashboards that we can showcase in real time. So if someone comes to me and says, show me, how compliant we are in ISO, or show me how compliant we are in HIPAA, or that we can just pull up a dashboard. It doesn't need to have, that PowerPoint that we put together ad hoc. Obviously we have a PowerPoint, but standardizing on what we're communicating on and having real-time dashboards has been very big for us in automating that work, so that our to Rohit's point, let the machines do what they're good at, and then folks like myself are then communicating what does those dashboards mean, and how is it relevant to the person who's asking the question, whether that's my C-level or it's being passed to the board or audit.
Yeah, no, fantastic points. I always joke, but honestly, it's not a joke. Like if you're maintaining your risk registers in Excel, that's a risk in itself. Like, I don't know how you can keep up with that. Like it's not designed to scale. With that, I would really quickly want to show you how we have built this here at Trust Cloud. And I can just walk you through, and it kind of encapsulates all of the data that you were talking about today. So this is our real-time risk intelligence dashboard, and we are tying it back to how you mentioned, Heather and Rohit, like back to your financial dollars, and we can show you like what is the residual financial impact that you're able to mitigate the way your controls are working currently. We're also kind of forcing action on you by telling you how many of these risks you have that are without treatment plans and owners, which means they are kind of orphan risk that you really don't have any sight on. And then we are also showing you your residual risk rating across your organization, your risks by categories, any risks that are coming up for review. But the last ones are my favorite, where you can talk about your 5 risk owners individually or as a group on how much risk, financial impact that they are bringing to your organization. And this, you can toggle between both of those criteria. So you can look at it on the financial side, and that's where typically vendors do bring a lot of the risk into your organization, and you really have to tie it down and see how their security is positioned, and also which groups are bringing most of the risks for your organization internally from your teams. And then the last one here, I think this is what tells a very compelling story. And Heather, based on your business environment, this is how you can communicate how you and your teams are able to bring risk down over a period of time and the financial impact associated with it. So if you are buying 12 companies in 12 months, I can see a lot of spikes here going up and down, and then hopefully the downward trend where you're able to wrangle all of those migrations and get a better handle on those data. But yes, all of this is generated in real time by the Trust Cloud platform. And this is designed to give you that holistic view of your risk management and also do a continuous programmatic risk assessment, because we are doing all these testing in your environment through our API-based integrations and pulling all of that data in real time. So you don't have to go through and do any of these individually for yourself. Any thoughts, Rohit or Heather, on this?
I was just gonna say a quick observation from here. I think this really talks about the risk buy down. Like how much are we buying it down, based on certain investments we would make. Like that investment could mean, we're maybe upgrading a certain control set, or we're bringing on additional certification for ourselves. And also I think that whole 20% effort gives 80% value. That Pareto principle, I think, it's pretty evident. Like if we put that into the numbers here, we should be able to, see what exactly is the value.
And that's exactly like, what is the financial impact that we are able to reduce with the budget that was allocated to you? So you can do that at each control level, at each risk level, and aggregate it up to show to your boards again on how that is communicated. Not only that, you can also further filter down the view. So if you are saying from a board of directors perspective, these are the 7 risks that I want to report to them, you can articulate it to them in the same, like from a business term or a financial term or a business term. And now you can have these multiple different views. So if you're going into FedRAMP and you have to change all of your 1,000 existing contracts, now you can go with your legal teams and have those conversations. Like, if we don't change this, we are promising way too many things or way too less. Based on this, we are going. So you can now do this multiply. And internally for us, we also use it as a customer churn. So one of their points, if we are not releasing certain features, how will that impact my customer retention over a period of time? So there are so many ways that you can tie it back to your revenue again, because that's a dollar amount associated with your application migrations. Basically, you can keep it as micro or as macro as you want it to be and be able to slice and dice and report that on those individual pieces. So that was on our Rush register piece, and really excited on how it has evolved over time, and it's keeping track of our risks. But I think now we can open it up to Q&A. Aaron.
Well, thank you all for that. This has been super insightful for me, and I really enjoyed the session so far. And as a reminder, if folks on the line who do have questions, feel free to submit those. We did have a couple come in. So the first one is, how do you uncover what your board cares about with little guidance?
I can start on that one. I think, first off, what questions are your board asking? And maybe what are they not asking about? Because what they're not asking about might suggest a gap in their thought process. And what they are asking about will, whether that's risk specific or in general around the business, it gives you an idea of what they're focused on from the business perspective, right? So I think hearing what they're asking and hearing what they're not asking are both just as important. And then I think to some extent, it's a little bit of trial and error and feedback, right? You want to be able to start presenting to them and then again, see what kind of questions they're asking. But I also think that diving down into the goals of the company is going to solve that, because the goals of the company should be aligned with the board. And so I think finding your business partners is really key. Knowing what each of your department's goals are and how it feeds up into the overarching goals of the company, and being able to drill down into those and understand, is there a place here where GRC comes into focus and how can I support them? I think that all feeds up into what the board cares about, as long as you're aligned with your business partners and they're aligned with the company goals.
Any thoughts from you, Rohit?
I wholly agree with everything Heather spoke about. I think, what you don't hear, I think that's the most important thing. Build a rapport with your board members. If you're reporting into board, if you have a dotted line into board, like build a rapport, like you'll know them as a human. I think that really helps you understand what are they concerned about. I've gotten a lot of dumb questions. I've gotten a lot of clever questions from multiple boards in the past. And it's, I think you being able to synthesize that and put it in the way they understand that is what matters at the end of the day. What do they care about, right? In some cases, one of my board, without disclosing the name of the company, they were just, concerned about, hey, I don't want to be the front page news if something bad happens. And from that, you could basically uncover what is it that they're looking for. They're looking for, not having a reputational hit for the company. And so your metric would be, based on that. If somebody cares about audit conformance, maybe a SOC certification health checker would be a good thing that you can put on top of it. But I think those are a few things you need to think about. And also, if you're a public company, one thing that's benefited me immensely is looking at the annual reports, 10K statements that the company publishes. If you look closely, you'll see what company is really trying to create, the value that they're trying to create, and what are the risks that they're trying to, one, figure out also, like sometimes it's open-ended, but also how they're trying to mitigate that. Nothing to do with cyber, nothing to do with GRC, but more on the business side of things. That will help you understand maybe a little deeper into, okay, maybe this is what business really cares about, and take that input, bring that up to the board. And maybe that's where, like Heather was talking about, maybe their thought process is not mature to a place where they could ask right questions, but this data that you were gathering from the business could help them uncover those things and maybe ask right questions. Maybe that's a good starting point.
I'm pretty sure that's a good webinar topic too, Rohit. So that will come up in the future. I'm sure Aaron and Katie, that would be a pretty insightful exercise for me too, to go through. There's so much story that goes on in that 10K that you can connect the dots and be like, okay, this is what's actually going for. And yes, I completely agree. I mean, there's like tailor the information for your audience, and it's also the whole notion of the ask behind the ask. Like if they're asking you this question, you have to come from, okay, where they are, what is their stressors, what is their need for to doing. So you kind of take it a step back and be like, okay, because you're asking this, that means these are the thought processes that you're having. Let's report on those things. So completely agree. Aaron, do we have another question?
Yeah, we have another one. How do risks evolve between public and private companies? I know we've talked about this a little bit, but you'll have some great experience with the differences.
Heather, you wanna go for it?
So I touched upon this a little bit, but I mean, again, it depends on your industry, it depends on the company, but I really think that to start, a lot of private companies are looking at security and then again revenue and how those things tie in together. Given my background is in startups, it's often a very fast-paced environment, and there's concerns around implementing security that slow down, the speed of sales, the speed of people working, the speed of the product getting built. And as you move into the public sector, and you have the stakeholders and the dividends and the public that is holding you accountable, there's a much bigger focus on the security aspect of things, but also on the regulations and the compliance. And I think, as you start off as a private company, unless you're in the security field, I think your budget and your bandwidth to work on security and your support from a high level to work on security is going to be much smaller. And so as you move into the public space, your job as either a GRC or a security person is to help the company grow into understanding security as a valued partner. GRC is a valued partner who can further the business goals, rather than just kind of that cost that's a necessity when you're private and just trying to get off the ground.
Just to add on to that, I think, private companies, you're just looking at this from a different lens, a viewpoint. Essentially, your actors, you're not on the board yet. Like you're just starting up. You're starting to build that value in the market. You're not wholly visible. like on the wider internet. So the actors, that you should be careful about is like how it may come through a third party or a vendor side of things, not so much a direct hit at a company. But in the public, of course, you have different motivations altogether. If a public company, you're liable for more people, right? More organizations, more governing bodies. Not sure how many of you have seen the whole SolarWinds thing, Devacle, that came out, SEC holding CISO and maybe one of the board liable for the compromise that happened a few years ago. Those are the things. It's not just about the operational risk. It's not just about cybersecurity risk, but now it's also coming into the boardroom. It's also coming personally, people being liable for these things. So it has moved away from, hey, a system got hit, a system got compromised. It's not that anymore. I mean, there is an element of that, but also it's going to ruin lives, and we've seen this. So I think it comes back to the point where if you know something, say something, right? We've always been telling about this. Making sure you report the risk. Ultimately, the cybersecurity teams more often than not are not the ones executing it. They're defining the policy, they're defining the framework, and reporting the risk to right people. And then in this case, right people being senior management and board. And as long as that's logged, documented, you have a way at least, to showcase. This is a risk register. I think, what Richa was talking about is you're showcasing what's at risk, what's at stake right now, and make sure that the right people know. And the investment wise and how you want to tackle those is left to the business. Business finally, is the play that comes in and says that, okay, this is something we want to do because this is risky for the business and we can move forward. Sure, but ultimately cybersecurity or GRC functions are not taking that call for the business. So yeah, I would say the stake is definitely different, between private and public.
I just want to double down on one of the things you just said, Rohit, if that's okay, Richa, which is that when you become a public company, or even as you become bigger in your industry, and that could still be as a private, you are under the eye much more than you were before. And we experienced that significantly at Desktop Metal. We could correlate phishing attempts that hit our email systems against Desktop Metal news articles going out, and just an increase in that. And I think that was an incredible metric to be able to showcase to leadership of this is why we need to increase these types of security things, because as we gain more notoriety across the industry and the world, we are also gaining a reputation with threat actors as well, right? And they're putting our eye on us. So I think that's a big piece too, is as you grow, it's not just security becomes more important, and to Rohit's point, there's accountability, right? We're in the public sector and things like that, but there's also more risk just because you're more visible.
Yeah, and I think publicity comes both ways, right? You're getting customers, you're also getting in the eyes of the attackers. So it's a double-edged sword. But no, I really liked it. I think to sum up this conversation, I would say going through this notion of why, what, and how helps articulate what's important to you as a business, how you're defending it, and more importantly for security teams and GRC teams to be a business enabler, and also go through that brand revamp of this is not a no. Everything comes to security and they're no. Now you can articulate why it's a no, how it's a no, and have everybody on board so that they can report, they feel comfortable coming to you to report certain things, and you can pretty transparently tell to them, okay, this is what the process would look like, and I'm going to report it up and how this is being managed. So thank you both of you for sharing your time and insight today. This was pretty insightful, and I think Aaron, Katie, and I have come up with so many new collaboration and webinar ideas. So we would definitely be reaching out. And thank you for everybody who's joined. If you guys have any questions and you want to send an email to us and we can answer that offline, we would be more than happy to do that as well. That is it from me, Aaron.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you,
Thank you, guys.
Thank you. Yeah.